that
I
you
need
have
to
5
wrap
more.
up the questions, 5 more minutes of the
5 more,
questions
yeah, 5 more.
before moving into the audience.
Before we start, I'm going to remind people to turn their phones on silent. Smile. This is your day. Enjoy it. It's going to be, I told them it's one person for each, no, like it's one person, like you know the two people responsible, it's one of them, and they've chosen amongst themselves. So right now it's Alen and Zoe. Are you looking for them? Are you looking for them? Okay. Yay. Get excited.
Okay. Ready?
I'm ready. First, we're going to, though, yeah. And at the end, I'm going to make the schedule change. Can I, yeah, like some people have class though and stuff. Like Candace was saying that like some people let her know they have like at 8:30 to 9:30, so they're gonna be here like. Okay. Whoops. So. Okay. Should we start? Is this on? Yeah.
Sorry.
Start.
10, 20 seconds.
Yeah. Sorry, what is the...
Caption. Sorry. Use option easy.
Is she telling someone about that?
What was that? No, you like vacancy.
Yeah.
Just caption.
Yeah. Is she telling someone about that?
2 seconds.
What?
That's, I don't know.
Okay.
2 seconds.
So should we just start?
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, just wait. My name is Grace, and this is Chris, and we are the co-directors of Empower McGill. We are so happy and excited to welcome everyone to the first annual Empower McGill conference. Before we begin, we just want to give everyone a reminder if they could turn their phones on to silent. That would be really appreciated. Thank you.
All right, so kind of give you guys a background of how we started. Started about 2 years ago. had a conversation with Justine Fedak, just talking about, she was very inspirational to me in terms of her having MS and doing so well at BMO, being Senior Vice President of Brand Advertising and Sponsorship. And it just kind of inspired me. And, one of the things that she said is, get out there and try to do well in business, but also be proactive and try to break into, we're speaking about the sports industry, going out there, doing your best and trying to break in. And it kind of inspired me to do something related. And so when I looked at some of my friends that were, either dropping out of school or taking a semester off or having really hard times with exams, and a lot of them had disabilities, it really, really hit me personally. Just because, you can probably say I'm probably a walking disability. I have 4, just got diagnosed with a 5th one, ADD, so it's fun, but it keeps me going. And so that's why I got inspired, and so from then on, put together a team, and we looked at, what are there other student groups, at different universities, are they doing anything related to disabilities and how that's impacting business across Canada? What are some of the opportunities and how are people getting involved? And so that's what motivated me and our whole team all together. They've been fantastic. The great thing about our team is, half of us have disabilities, half of us don't. And that's what it's all about. It's about inclusivity. And that's at the end of the day, we just want everybody to be able to be successful in business.
Yeah, so over 1 in 10 adults reports being limited in their daily activities because of a disability. So whether it is like the person themselves or someone that they know, everyone is in some way impacted by disabilities. So what we aim to do is we want to recognize the positive relationship between a diverse workforce and the overall success of a business. So we want to highlight the mutual benefits that can be attained through development of an environment that is diverse and inclusive. So before we move on with the conference, we just want to take this opportunity to give some thank yous. So first and foremost, we would like to thank our team. It's been a really, really long process, but we're so proud of all of you and all the hard work you guys have put into this. Being a first-year conference, we set some really high goals, and you definitely have had your work cut out for you, but you've all exceeded both of our expectations. We would like to thank all of our partners, Bell, National Bank, CN, Air Canada, EY, TD, Medicom, BMO, MUS, Desote, Air Canada, the Canadian Business Sensibility. You have all been such an incredible support to us, and this would not have been possible without you. To our title sponsor, RBC. The event that you held last night was an incredible success, and it was an amazing opportunity for all the students who attended. We are so thankful for the role that you guys have taken. You've gone above and beyond as our title partner, and we could not be more grateful for that. Your dedication to our vision of Empower McGill has helped make this much more than anything we could have ever imagined. And finally, to all the speakers, your participation in this event is so appreciated. We know all your input and expertise will help empower not only future business leaders, but all the students at the conference today to achieve their full potential. Before I go on, I want to just make a quick note of changes in the schedule. So we want to inform everyone that the panel number 4 and the second keynote will be switched. So the panel number 4 will go until 3:50 instead of 3:40, and then from 3:55 until 4:35 will be the second keynote. So there's just a switch there. So to everyone here today, we appreciate you being here, and we really hope you enjoy the conference. Thank you.
So without further ado, we'd like to introduce Lynn Lapierre.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn Lapierre from EY, also known as Ernst & Young, and it's a real honor for me to be here today with you to facilitate our first panel. Actually, I Can I ask people to come up right away, Chris? Yeah. So I'd ask my panelists to come up, because this isn't about me, this is about what we want to hear from our panelists. I think this first topic is an excellent one because it's so tangible and concrete. The topic of gaining a competitive advantage, so tools for successful recruitment. Really, when we reflected on what the objective of this first panel is, it really is to provide guidance to job seekers, students, and other job seekers, and tips on how to be successful in your job search, specifically if you are someone with a disability, although I think a lot of what you're going to hear can be applicable more broadly as well, and also to help job seekers understand how employers operate in the recruiting process. And I think this panel is really well positioned, given that it's going to take place right before the job interviews, so the speed interview session. So I think this is a great, it'll be a great segue into it. So without further ado, I guess maybe just a few words about myself. So I've been with EY for almost 20 years now in our talent team. So I've always worked in human resources role. I do have a special passion for diversity and inclusiveness. I was in that role for Canada, EY, for a few years. Right now, I'm focused almost exclusively on our Quebec market, and D&I, diversity and inclusiveness, is a key component to my role, and certainly I can easily say the one that I am the most passionate about. So I'd like to introduce the panelists that we are so fortunate to have with us today, and perhaps start with, right next to me, Lisa. Lisa Kuiper. So you have the descriptions, you have the biographies of each of these panelists in the brochure, but I'll just say a few words. So Lisa Kuiper is Employer Development Manager, Career Education at Brock University, and in that capacity, she's responsible for the development of employment opportunities for students, graduates, and alumni, and with a focus on working with diversity students. She has over 20 years of experience related to graduate recruitment, employer development, and diversity. Lisa, I was so impressed when I read her bio, is a member of so many committees and associations. So to name a few, she's chair of the Diversity Committee, an active member of the KC, Career Association for Career Educators and Employers, National Association of Career and Employers. I think most notably, she's also the recipient of the KC Excellence in Innovation Award for Diversity, and was awarded the President's Distinguished Staff Service Award for Outstanding Contributions from Brock University this past year. That's a mouthful. So welcome, Lisa, and thank you so much for making your way from the Niagara region in Ontario to be with us today. Next, we have Nicholas Greischner. Did I mispronounce? I did mispronounce that. I've been practicing all morning and I've mispronounced it. Greischner. Greischner, thank you. Nicholas is the Canadian Human Resources Director for Accenture. And he joined Accenture in 1998 after completing his university degree at HEC in business administration and specializing in human resources. In his current role, he's a member of the Canada Management Committee at Accenture, and he's responsible for HR programs and initiatives across Canada. So Nicholas has an extensive human resource background. He's held different HR roles during his career, including financial services HR lead at Accenture France, Canada Technology HR lead for 4 years, client account HR lead for a large Canadian utilities client, amongst other roles. So a lot of good business experience there that I think will be helpful. And next, I'd like to introduce Miranda Allen. So Miranda is from Laval, here in Montreal, north of Montreal. She's an employment counselor at an organization called L'Étape, up in Laval. And this is an organization that provides job search and workplace integration and maintenance services for individuals with both physical and intellectual disabilities. And Miranda's been working as an employment counselor for the last 36 years, so huge experience there. And with over 2 decades of experience specifically working with people with disabilities. And although she's held various positions throughout her professional career, Miranda's passion has always brought her back to counseling and training, as you were sharing with me, Miranda, yesterday. And last but not least, we have Vanina Pitch, who is National Diversity and Inclusion Coordinator at PwC, also a global professional services firm. And prior to taking on her current role, which I understand she's been in she started just recently, Vanina worked in campus recruitment at both PwC and in other organizations, both in Canada and Australia. So a lot of campus recruiting experience there that I'm sure is going to be really helpful to the participants or the attendees today as well. So Vanina graduated from John Molson School of Business, and she holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree with a specialization in human resources management. So as you can see, we have a wealth of experience and expertise on the panel today. And I think I'd like to kick it off by asking a few questions to the 4 panelists about the recruitment process in general, and to get your sense, and 2 of you are from the business world, 2 of you work in providing career search services, so perhaps take it from each of your perspectives. But I'd like to throw out a few questions there, and we will reserve a good 15 minutes at least at the end of this session to take questions from the room. So let me throw it off by asking a few questions. So if we think about some of the myths about disabilities in the recruiting process, what are some of those myths? What are some of the biases that you have observed or experienced? And as an extension to that, particularly, so both from an employer side, what can we do to eliminate those biases? And from a career services side, how can we work on eliminating those biases as well? So that's a number of questions. Feel free to take them as you wish. Lisa?
Okay, I'll start. I work at Brock University, and so oftentimes when I'm working with employers, one of the myths that seems to always pop up is that it costs a lot of money to accommodate someone with a disability, and that is not true. Typically, the average cost to accommodate accommodation is around $400, and that is if only they need those accommodations. So oftentimes I have to talk to employers to say, you know, it's not necessarily expensive to have to accommodate someone, and oftentimes most of the students already have some of their accommodations already taken care of by themselves. They've already purchased devices and things that they need. So that's one of the things that I think is a myth that often happens when I talk to employers.
From an employer perspective, I'll take this, but I'll also talk about biases. One of the things that we've done to make sure that to dispel this, also it depends on the disability, but there's a lot of organizations that you can partner with that don't cost a lot of money to help integrate people with disabilities in the workplace. And we've done, or we're piloting something with a company to help someone with autism to work within Accenture. So that's one of the examples. The other great element of the question that was asked by Lynn are the biases in general. And one of my biggest learning and the things I'm super engaged in at work is that first we have to realize that as humans we all have biases, right? It's just part of life. A lot of the employers, if they're advanced in their inclusion and diversity space, they do a lot of training that we call the unconscious bias training. And what that does is that raises that I do have a bias, and it's okay. I don't need to judge myself about the fact that I have a bias. I am a human being, therefore I have a bias. But what I need to do about this is I need to realize what are my biases, and I need to put things in place so they don't prevent me from making an assumption or a decision. So what we are doing at Accenture as well is we're making sure our leadership team and our recruiters go through the unconscious bias training. So that's a very helpful way to ensure that we catch ourselves.
Well, one thing I've discovered in the last couple of years is things are changing for the better. Now I have employers calling me and they say, I want to hire somebody with a disability, but what do I have to do? And you know, is it complicated? And sometimes they're referred by other employers. Like I work with some major chain stores. So one manager will hire one person and it works out. And he says, oh, and then they have these meetings and he said, you know, you should call, they tap there. And you know, it's simple, you know, like it's we make it simple, and the employers, when I first started, they would never call me, but now they're calling, and I haven't seen too much bias. And if there's bias, it's because they don't understand, or they're missing information, or you know, they say, well, you know, as you said, it's going to cost a lot of money, it's complicated. But when they get the proper information, they said, okay, let's go.
So you're seeing a lot more interest on the part of the employer.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas in the
And
past, you were the one reaching out to
Oh
them.
yeah, like that's
Yeah.
part of our mission, is to promote. But now it seems that my job is getting a lot easier because the employers are reaching out to the different organizations to get the proper information.
That's great to hear. Vanina, did you have any comments?
So one of the things that I believe are very important is that to realize that diversity and disabilities really is everyone's responsibility, whether you have a disability or not. And creating an inclusive work environment is about everyone to be aware of that and to participate. And also to Nicholas' point, what we do at PwC is that we do have also training about unconscious bias. So we have different e-learns and videos, and so we educate staff and recruiters to be aware of their own unconscious biases, just so that, you know, they can act accordingly. And so, for instance, during the orientation day for, you know, new staff that are joining PwC, we, you know, show them a video that is very sensitive, and it, you know, every time I actually watch the video, I get sensitive myself, sensible, and so I just really believe that, you know, working together and socializing together and creating this inclusive environment is very important, and we do our best at PwC to educate our staff. So
what I'm hearing you say is it's as much about educating not just the recruiters, but
Yeah.
the broad employee population, right? To facilitate
Yes.
integration into the workplace.
definitely.
Great, thank you. All right, so I think at this point I'd like us to jump right into the more tangibles, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in the room that are really wanting to hear about practical tips. And so why don't we start by asking you to talk about one or two do's and don'ts for successful recruitment, and whoever feels most comfortable can start.
I mean, I'll start just because I have the microphone.
Okay.
But, so for do's, I would say, and I will talk specifically about the interview itself for now. But I would say it's always important to have a list of questions at the end of the interview, you know, just so that you can learn more about the organization and you can get some of your questions answered as well. It's also good to, you know, have learned about beforehand, to be prepared. So obviously learn about the culture of the organization and what the values and the visions are. At the same time, you know, I would also like make sure that sometimes, you know, you do create a list of questions, and you don't want to sound too robotic either at the end of the interview. So if you realize that throughout the interview some of your questions were already answered, just feel free to, you know, either not ask them, or you can even say, you know, oh, you know, based on what you had said earlier, do you have any more recommendations? So I guess that's what the do's are from my point of view. And then for the don'ts for the interview process, would really be to avoid eye contact. So that would be a don't. So please, you know, maintain eye contact during the interview. Also, one of the things that I try to avoid during the first face-to-face interview would be to ask about the salary and the benefits. So if your questions are only about that, you know, it's not necessarily the best impression that you will show. I mean, obviously you'll know about that throughout the process. Usually the recruiter, you know, tells you what they would like to offer you. So yeah, these are my don'ts, do's and don'ts for now. They're very general, so I'll just pass on the microphone to.
Okay. What I try and work with my, I call them clients, but they're not clients, they're my people, is to be positive. And when the employers call us, when we, to hire somebody with the disability, they know the person has a disability. So we work with them to find a way to present themselves in the interview in a positive aspect, to always talk about what they can do. The employer already knows that the person has a limitation. The limitation has been explained to them to a certain extent. And as you said, sometimes no adaptation is needed. Nothing is needed. The person is perfect for the job. So what you have to work on is your speech when you go into your interview. Use your own language that you're comfortable with. Be positive. You know, you have to be authentic. Like as you said, you can't be robotic. You know, you have to work on that. And the other thing too is to, you know, be nice to yourself. You know, like the anxiety and the perceptions and everything. You know, you can discuss that with your counselor, with your family or whatever. You know, just be positive and it will be much more pleasant. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Nicholas.
I'm just going to add, I think from an employer perspective, I really like the tips Vanina shared. So I'm just going to keep it a bit general on 2 tips. The first one, and one of the realizations I made, you know, probably a bit too late in my career, is that the importance of practicing, right? So practice is super important. If you anticipate a question is going to be particularly difficult, whether it's about you know, disclosing your disability or just a question in general about your CV, practice with a lot of people so that you are comfortable with the flow of how you're going to answer the question. That's going to make a big difference. I actually apply this still to this day on a lot of different things. I'm like, sometimes we think that we're above the practice. We're not. Let's just be clear, we're not above that. The other thing I really liked about the robotic questions at the end, I haven't done a lot of recruiting in a lot of years. I'm more of a business leader doing the final interviews. And you know, the questions, I feel the stress of the applicants coming to try and just outsmart themselves in the process. Don't stress yourself out because you will look robotic. But think about it more from a perspective of what's the conversation you want to bring. I always love it when I have a great conversation at the end of an interview that gives me insights to the individual. That's what I'm looking for.
So authenticity, right? Being genuine, really doing that introspection prior to the interviews to what are the things I really want to be talking about. Yeah. Super, thanks. Lisa.
Just if I could add to all of this, one of the things that I stress in our office is that students need to know yourself. You need to know what your skills are and how to articulate that to the employer. If you're not able to do that, the employer is not able to see the value in you. So you need to know your strengths and your weaknesses, and how are you working on those weaknesses, and how are you giving examples of your successes that you've had and the skills that you have. I think that's very imperative, because it doesn't matter what question gets thrown at you, you're going to be prepared because you know yourself well enough to be able to answer that.
So know yourself. Oh, I think that's great advice, right? And and really delve into that. Know yourself, and as some of you mentioned, practice with friends, families, ask them if that, test that out with them. Super. So if we go into specifically the topic of disabilities and in the whole recruiting process, one of the big questions we're often asked is, at what point in the recruiting process should a person with a disability disclose, or should they disclose that at all? And so I'd be really interested in hearing your views on that. And again, anyone can start. Okay, Vanina.
I'm glad we're not just going back and
No.
forth. A little bit diversity. And the order here is great.
So, I mean, what I would suggest is that if you do have a disability and you know you are going to have an interview, feel free and comfortable to disclose it before the interview, because oftentimes employers, they will accommodate you and they want to accommodate you. So, you know, sometimes you could have, they would give you more time to answer questions if they know you have a disability. Or if you have to do any tests, like assessment tests, where it involves, you know, going through a psychometric test, or, you know, writing an article, working on a group project together with other teammates, they will give you more time to complete those tasks. And so if you keep it for yourself, then we won't know, and then we won't be able to accommodate you, and at the end of the day, you'll just penalize yourself. So that's really my recommendation. You know, be open to it, be open, share it with us ahead of time, and so that's what we do at PwC, and I'm sure, you know, most of the organizations do that as well, and we have a lot of accessibility procedures as well. So, you know, it can be from, depending on what your disability is, it can be giving you the tools that you need, like different phones, or it can be adjusting the furniture, the work furniture. So it really includes different things. And so, yeah, just feel free and comfortable to share that with us.
I agree, and also for people that are deaf or whatever, we pay for the interpreter for the interview. So, and we explain before the person goes, you know, how it works, how to deal with an interpreter, and sometimes I'll go along just to make sure that everything goes smoothly. And also, I tell my people, it's important to prepare and practice and use your own approach and to be positive, because the employers, they don't want, you know, to, if you show up, and they want you to be comfortable. So just do it in a positive way, and it works out better.
I'll actually go back to the first, I think the first or second question about the myths, but I just want to put one thing out there, and I think this crowd is starting to realize this, but as employers, we all want you, right? We want and we need you in our organizations because it makes business sense. It's not a corporate responsibility. It makes business sense for us. So employers are catching up on this, and therefore disclosing it, we still have lots of ways to go, so let me be clear about this. I think, you know, at Accenture, and I would argue that every company still has a lot of progress to make, but we know that we want like a lot of students, and we want a lot of applicants that represent a lot of the diversity that it's, or actually all of the diversity that is out there. So when you go through the process, for practical reasons, it's good to disclose, but it could be a competitive advantage for you, and I think we just need to say it. At the same time, it's a very personal question, and like I don't currently suffer from a disability, but depending on the disability, you know, I may decide personally based on how comfortable I am, and this is again something I would practice. I would work with others just to make sure that it comes out in the right way, because you always need to sell yourself. In an interview, you're there to sell yourself.
Thank you, Nicholas. And Lisa, so
If I
you
could
work
go
with
back
a
to
lot
that,
of students on, you work with a lot of students on, from that perspective. So really interested in your views on that.
Just to add to that, what I found is when it comes to disclosure, it is a personal decision, and you have to be very comfortable with that decision. If you are not comfortable disclosing, if you're nervous or you're not sure how to approach it, it's going to come across that way. You have to be confident. Like I said, you have to know yourself. So in our office, we have an actual spreadsheet that actually has the pros and cons of disclosing at different times, and what the pros and cons are at each time that you decide to do that. And once you make that decision, it's going to be different for every employer. I mean, if you're applying to a position that actually is a diversity posting and you know it is, it's probably to your advantage to disclose maybe earlier in the actual resume, in the cover letter, I'm sorry. So it just depends on the nature of the position and how you approach it. Ideally, it's just to make sure that you're comfortable with your script and you've been practicing it and you're able to clearly articulate that you're able to do the functions of the job regardless of what your disability is.
I'd be interested to know if any of you would have any specific examples, obviously without naming any names, but any more specific examples of situations where you've seen someone disclose a disability effectively.
I can actually talk about one that it wasn't effective.
That was not effective, okay.
For an interview and didn't disclose it, didn't even indicate whether or not that the interview space was going to be accessible. They were in a wheelchair when they showed up. They weren't able to get to the interview room and as a result lost out on the interview. But I've also had a case where a student who had a learning disability and was applying for a job that required that they had to do some assessment testing. He was applying for a school board, and it was part of the assessment that he had to write this assessment test, and was nervous about approaching the employer. And I said to them, you know, if you don't, what happens if you don't disclose? If you don't disclose, are you doing yourself a disservice because you're not getting the accommodations you require to be successful in that testing? Or are you okay with not having that accessibility accommodation provided for you? So he went ahead and asked, and sure enough, they provided the extra time that he needed, and he was successful in the testing.
Thank you. Those are great tangible examples.
Also, like the cover letter, like for my people that are deaf, they say like I have I'm a deaf person, whatever. I work mostly with French. So they have a letter, but you know, I have a great manual dexterity. I have my driver's license, this and that, and then I have good. All their competences are very, 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 very visual and positive. And 9 out of 10 times when I send the email with the little thing talking about their handicap of being deaf or whatever, the employers call me back and say, oh, can I see this guy? You know, he has all these different, he can work these machines and this and that. So, but every person has to use what, you know, is good for them.
What is comfortable to them.
Yeah.
All right, great. I think at this point, we want to start taking questions from the room because we want to give participants today the opportunity to ask their questions. So I'm hoping we are going to get some. Over here. Do we have a runner? Okay, we have a runner running to you.
I would like to know your opinion on disclosing your disability when it's a visible one. So you don't have to technically say it, but is it an advantage to present it when you are in an interview?
So just to repeat the question, if it is visible or invisible?
If it's a visible one.
Visible one.
For example, I'm a little person and it's when I come in the room, everybody can see it. So I'm wondering if, do I try to present it or I let the obvious talk?
Good question. So Lisa, can I ask you maybe to comment in the example that was given, if I'm a little person, do I let the obvious talk or do I present it beforehand? This would be her question.
I think that's up to you. How comfortable you are in talking about the disability if you need to talk about it. I think from an employer's perspective, they may have some questions around it, so you can eliminate those questions in their mind by bringing it up in the sense of not necessarily the disability, but the actual accommodations you may need if you need accommodations. You don't necessarily have to get into the specifics about the disability, because what that does for the employer side, and I'll let the other employers talk about that, but I think it kind of puts them at ease in understanding where you're coming from if you are to do that. So I don't know, I'll let you.
Yeah, maybe the perspective I would give to you, because there's a lot of variables here at play, but is look at the job requirements, right? So it really depends what the job requirements are. If it's an office job that doesn't like that, the physical aspect would not be a challenge. It's really up to you. But if there are some specific qualifications and requirements of the jobs, then yeah, you need to talk about it, right? Because as an employer, you'll be thinking, okay, is there going to be a challenge? So I think it's the homework part that I think is also important there.
All right, thank you. And so what I'm hearing loud and clear here is to not focus so much on the disability per se, but any accommodations that might be required, because that really is what relates to the work, right? Is there an impact on the work, the potential job? And then if so, are there accommodations required? By focusing it that way as well, I think you're showing the employer that you're really trying to work with them, right? You want to make this successful. Okay, what other questions do we have? Okay, we have someone here at the back of the room.
Hi, so my question pertains to disclosure, and I heard your opinions loud and clear, but I was thinking that there are certain companies like Accenture, PwC, EY, RBC, which have clear diversity and inclusion mandates, and you know that they are doing a lot in the disability space. But there are a lot of other companies out there where you don't know what their policy is, whether the recruiters have gone through unconscious bias training or not. In that case, what would be your recommendation for disclosure?
Okay, so interesting question. So the comment, and it's flattering to the employers who are up on stage, that many large organizations we know have gone through a lot of diversity training and training on unconscious biases, etc., but that there are smaller organizations out there that are perhaps not as aware and who have not received the awareness training relating to disabilities. And so would your recommendation about disclosure be the same for individuals who are applying to smaller organizations like that as it would be for these larger organizations? So maybe Miranda, since you probably work with a lot of small businesses.
Yeah, well, basically, if they, as I said, more and more employers are contacting us because of it's business. It's not only because they, diversity or whatever. They need people to work. So when the smaller organizations call us, and they're, I'd say, what is it, the percentage of the companies in Quebec are under 50 employees. It's a large amount. Anyway, what we do is we clarify the situation. We tell them, like if you want to hire a person, what kind of jobs do you have? And then we go through the same process, and we explain to them. And when they have the proper information, they say, oh, that's I thought it was complicated, And the fear factor, like sometimes there's a bit of the fear factor, for physical handicaps or whatever, like things with the accident de travail and the back problems and this and that. Well, we clarify that too. We explain to them.
So in your particular situation, you have the opportunity to explain that on behalf of the candidate. Lisa, the candidates that you're working with, they have to present it on their own. So what would you recommend to them, if you don't mind me? And then Vanina, I know you want to intervene as well.
It is more difficult when you are working with smaller organizations because they're smaller, they may only have 2 or 3 people in the whole department. So they may not have a lot of representation of disabilities in the workplace, as a larger employer would. So really, when you're applying for smaller organizations, it actually, the onus comes onto you to be the educator to the employer. And it empowers you in a sense that because of that, you're able to articulate what your needs are and what your accommodations are and work with that employer so that they begin to understand what is needed in the workplace. And so it is more difficult with a smaller organization, but the onus, it empowers you to be the one to educate the employer and to even use your accommodations as part of your empowerment as well.
And Vanina, I know you want to comment on this as well. So Nicholas, you're passing the mic there.
So I wanted to take the approach of, when you're a candidate, and I know when you're graduating, you're dying to have your first job, and you really want to do everything to have it. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself the question also, is this organization a place where I would like to work? And so when we talk about inclusive work environments, it's really for you to be able to be your true self at work and not try to be somebody else. And I really believe that whether it's a big or small organization, it will be better for you to be transparent and to show the organization who you truly are. Because if you don't, whether you have a visible or invisible disability, let's say you don't share it and then you do get the job, that's great. But then if you are at work and you realize that no one's open, to talking about it, and now you don't want to talk about it either because you're like, I've lied about it, and now if I say something, maybe they won't accept me for who I am. And so then you get really uncomfortable in this work environment, and in the long run, I just don't think you would, be happy. So I really believe it's better to be transparent, to really show who you are, and then if the organization does not accept it or they're not open to it, well, maybe it's not the right organization for you. And I know it's hard to see that sometimes because when you are in university, you really want to have your first job, but believe me, you want to work for an organization that will accept you for who you are. So that's what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you. Do we have time, Chris, where's Chris? Are we good? I see someone else would like to ask a question. So yes, over here. And I think we do have time for a few more questions, which is great.
My question is it ever beneficial to disclose an invisible disability that might not need accommodation right away? Say you have chronic pain or you have schizophrenia or something like that, where you might not necessarily need accommodation every day, but it might come up in the future.
So if you have a disability that may not come up every day and would not be apparent up front, like schizophrenia, for example, would it ever make sense to disclose that up front? Does anyone want to comment on that?
That's a very good question. Really, I can't answer about the schizophrenia because I don't work with people with...
Chronic pain was another example.
Yeah, that's
yes.
right. The chronic
yes.
pain, honestly, each person is responsible for, like, as I said, like l'ETAP there, when the person comes, they have, the employer knows that they have a handicap. But if the person, it's your responsibility to decide, the way that you're going to look for work. I personally would say, like, use terms that are comfortable with you, because the employer will probably say, well, is there something? You say, well, I have pain, but it's very, very, very under control. I've never missed a day of work because of it, but this is something. But, you have to find a way. And also, I find, this is just my humble personal opinion, is that if it comes up later and you haven't said it, it's going to cause, for most people, it's going to cause them anxiety. They say, well, you know, what's going to happen if he finds out or if he doesn't find out, or, you know, what should I do or whatever. Because I have a couple of clients that they'll go for job interviews and they don't say anything about their handicap, and they comes back. Sometimes they get the job, sometimes they don't, but it causes them anxiety.
Would a good approach be to also present it as, so explaining the disability, but also explaining at the same time how I've worked with that, how I've, you know, here is what I'm living with, and here is how I manage that?
I'm coming from a university, just a perspective as far as some of our co-op students who go out on work placement and do not disclose their disability, and then halfway through their placement realize that the employer is upset because they feel that the individual is not living up to the terms of agreement in their work placement. And it's because the disclosure piece wasn't shared with the employer. Oftentimes we find out after, once the student does disclose that disability, then the employer is willing to work with the student, and then the student is now successful in the work placement. In regards to your session on the topic of how to, you need to articulate to the employer when you are working through your disability. So if you, for example, if you've had some successes in a work placement or in another job or a volunteer position or paid employment where you've worked through some of those things because of your disability, and you created strategies that work for you, when you go in for that interview, you want to talk about those things, the successes that you've had and how you work through that disability, that it's not an issue. You've gone through it, you know what you're doing. And then being able to share that information with the employer.
Because it is a life challenge, right? Like in interviewing, we often ask people about a challenge that they have successfully dealt with in their life, and that would be a perfect example in my mind. All right. Okay, one more question. I'm told we have time for one more question right here.
I want to go back to the interview part, more specifically the salary. You said don't talk about the salary on the first interview, which is right. However, I work in business development, and 9 times out of 10, they would say, how much? They would ask me literally on the phone, first interview, how much you want? What's the best answer for that?
So when I'm asked, what are your salary expectations?
I would say, if you're asked, you have to answer. What I respond well to is a range, right? Because, so why is the employer asking you this question? He wants to know, am I speaking to someone in the right job classification at large, right? So that's usually I can't speak to everyone asking you that question, but I would say, to me, that's why I would ask, like, am I looking for someone that makes 60K or 150K a year? Because that makes a big difference. So go with a range. Do it a bit on the, like, just slightly on the upper side, because it's going to help you later. That's it.
There seems to be agreement. Anything else to add? No. Okay. All right. So on that note, I think we can wrap up. I understand that we're going to take a short break, and then we'll be moving into our next segment, which is the speed interviewing. So we're hoping, no, we're not going to be moving. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So we are hoping that some of the tips and advice that have been offered to you by our panelists today were helpful to you. In the course of the morning, I'm sure most of the panelists are going to be here for at least the morning, the rest of the day, and I'd certainly encourage all of you to mingle with them, and don't be shy to come up to any of us and ask the questions that you have, because this is the opportunity. So I want to thank you so much for your great questions. I want to say a big thank you to the panelists. I think that you've offered some really great insights, and wish everyone a great continuation of the day. Thank you so much.
Okay, so actually, we're going to be doing 2 workshops. And so for the people who are doing speed interviews, you'll know if you're doing speed interview because you're a student, also a company representative, you would know that you're doing a speed interview. But for the students, you'll have a yellow tag at the back of your name tags. So if you do, then go on to registration when we have a 5-minute break, so you can go as you please, get some food, relax. But also here in this room, we're going to be doing a disclosure workshop hosted by Canadian Business Sensibility. And so that will be happening in 5 minutes. Cool. Thank you.